The sign on the frosted glass door said, Matthew J. Singletary, Director of Corporate Systems Analysis. That's me, Matt, to my friends. I'm almost 6 feet tall, stocky, blue-eyed, confident, and a well-respected businessman. At 29 years old, I was, as far as I knew, the only person with that specific title in the business world. When people asked what it meant, I often shrugged. No one ever explained it to me either. What was clear was my role in the company structure. If the business world were a Western movie, I was the clever cowboy who rode in to fix things and make the place better for everyone. My boss, who owned Reese Donaldson Enterprises, counted on me to travel to his various operations. I had full authority to analyze how each part worked. I could make many changes right away. For bigger issues, like recommending a top manager be let go, I would send my suggestions to Mr. Donaldson. He almost always agreed with me, and when he didn't, he took the time to explain his reasoning. I wasn't sure if I was at the very top of management or nearer to the bottom, but it didn't really matter. The only person who could truly oversee my work was the boss. Whenever there was a disagreement in the office, a quick call to the boss's private number settled it. I had his number saved in my contacts, and many of his senior staff did not. I had skills that helped me find problems, uncover delays, and identify issues that cost Mr. Donaldson money. I used these skills every day for him. I was good at my job, very good, and I was known as someone you didn't want to cross because I could spot dishonesty right away. I struggled to use my skills effectively in my personal life. It was the day after Independence Day. I was busy packing my briefcase with everything I needed. It was only 10:30 a.m. on Friday, but everyone was eager to start the weekend early because Mr. Cummings had just announced that he was closing the office and sending everyone home. He explained that most of the businesses we relied on were already closed, and since his employees wouldn't be able to accomplish much, it wasn't worth keeping the office open. I thought that made sense. As I closed my briefcase, I shut my office door and jokingly patted the sign on it. Since there were people watching, I pretended to wipe off a non-existent smudge on the door with my sleeve. Noticing a crowd heading to the elevators down the hall, I began to run toward them as if in a playful competition to get there first. Laughter filled the air, and some of my coworkers rushed to catch up with me. It was all in good fun. Donaldson's was like a family business, and we all got along well. By 11:10, I was home, and I'm sure my eyes sparkled with excitement as I unpacked my new toy, a Shaba drone. It was one of the best-equipped drones around and had a remarkable range. According to the manual, Shaba means ghost in Arabic. It was named after the F-117 stealth fighters from the Gulf Wars. This drone was known for being quiet and discreet. My amazing wife, Faye, had somehow found this treasure on a bidding site for a small fraction of its value, winning it by just 1 cent as the auction ended. Now it was all mine, a birthday gift from last Sunday. I had been working on it all week after work, getting it ready to fly. All I needed to do was check it one last time and clean up some fingerprints on one of the rotor blades. It was ready for its first flight. I just wanted my wife, Faye, who I had been married to for 3 years, to watch. That morning, Faye had said she would be out showing houses to clients, but she should be home early in the evening. I really wanted her to be here right away. I usually didn't bother her at work, but this time I thought I would call her phone to see if she could take off the afternoon and come home for the flight. It was just afternoon, so she was probably still on lunch, but my call went straight to voicemail. The same happened when I called again. I was confused because Faye worked as a junior real estate agent for a friendly man named Martin Rutherford, who was 64. Their main office was on the southwest side of town, but I knew she wasn't there since I had called their landline first. I felt a bit annoyed because Mr. Rutherford had a rule that all employees should be easy to reach on their work phones. Maybe she was in a place with a weak cell signal. That can happen. Giving up, I decided I couldn't wait for her. She probably wouldn't be very interested in seeing the Shaba fly for the first time anyway. Flying toys weren't really her thing. I rolled the device onto the driveway in front of our garage, started the small motors, and tested all its different functions. I took the small drone for a quick test flight, flying it in a lazy-ite pattern between our house and the other side of the street for a few minutes. I was getting used to the controls and the view from the bulky remote control. The video from the camera on the bottom impressed me. When I landed the drone back on the driveway, I brought the remote control inside to keep it out of the sun. I connected the video feed to the big monitor I usually used with my laptop. I liked using the larger screen for my laptop, and it worked perfectly with the drone. Soon I was flying again from my desk in our study. I guided the drone out over the middle of the street, then turned it right and powered it up to climb to 40 feet. That seemed high enough to avoid any poles or houses nearby, even if the drone drifted from the center of the road. After a few minutes of looking at the world through the drone's cameras, I relaxed and enjoyed myself. It reminded me of my younger days. I've always loved flying. My Uncle Jake taught me when I was a teenager, and I flew solo for the first time at 15 in a small plane. I got a multi-engine certification 2 years later, letting me fly my uncle's twin-engine Cessnas. Those were some of the best years of my life. But renting even a small plane became too expensive, and times were tough for Faye and me. I couldn't afford to fly anymore. This little drone was the closest I could get to flying, and I loved it. I flew a few blocks without anyone noticing the drone above. It was quiet and small, so it didn't attract much attention. Most people tend to look at things close to the ground anyway. They wouldn't see me. But I could see them. Kids were playing outside, people were washing their cars, and a golden retriever was getting a bath in one yard. Everyone enjoyed their day on a warm summer afternoon. I paused the drone in front of a nice brick house just off the street to practice hovering and changing its height. I didn't want to fly east because I would be close to the home of Miss Kelly Sanderson. She was about the same age as Faye and me, but some said she had celebrated her 30th birthday several times, so who really knew? What was clear was that she had just gone through her third divorce and seemed to be looking for a new partner. Kelly was known for being playful and often involved herself with anyone showing her attention. Her sister even mentioned that Kelly would seek companionship from just about anyone. I was the only male present when I heard this, so I quickly moved on. I didn't want to know more. Unfortunately, I also knew that Kelly didn't seem to care if the person she flirted with was single or taken. She made me uneasy. I turned the drone gently to the left and flew back west, going past my house and speeding up a bit. No one noticed the drone, even though it was louder during this faster flight. I traveled west over several streets until I reached the edge of our neighborhood and slowed down to a quieter speed. All the houses in our area looked pretty much the same. They shared a lot of the same designs, with spacious yards, two-car garages, and roomy layouts. The homes on the west side were known as the George Orwell neighborhood because they were a bit nicer than the others in the area. They had garages that fit 3 or 4 cars instead of just 2, and each home had a nice swimming pool in the backyard. The drone flew to the end of the quiet street where the nicest houses in the neighborhood were. Beyond them was just open land, and I wanted to bring the drone back to check the system, see how long it would take to recharge, and many other things. I began to turn the drone around to come back home. As it turned left and headed east, I noticed a flash of color to my right by the garage of Taylor Hennings's lovely house. I hesitated, feeling a frown form on my face. I turned the drone back toward the spot because it looked like the bright red of my wife's Lexus, the one we got a few months ago, because Faye needed a nice car to show potential buyers homes. I couldn't think of any reason for her car to be in this area, especially not at the Hennings home. But there it was. I knew it was her car even before I got closer. A moment later, I was near enough to see the license plate by tilting the camera forward and zooming in from about 20 yards away. It was definitely Faye's Lexus. "What?" I mumbled, feeling uneasy. My mind was racing, sensing that something was wrong. I noticed movement in the Hennings' backyard. Carefully, I guided the drone lower, looking for anything in the way. As I got closer, I prepared myself. There they were, enjoying the warm summer day by the pool. My wife, Faye, was with Taylor Hennings and his wife, Brianna. They seemed to be sharing a private moment that filled me with concern. I took a deep breath to calm myself. The scene below was hard to understand, and a wave of hurt rushed over me. I worked hard to keep my feelings in check, trying to stay calm so I could think clearly. After a little while, I managed to look at what was happening with a sense of acceptance. Mr. Taylor didn't seem special in many ways, and I couldn't figure out why Faye would choose him. If she was going to break our promises, why him? Brianna, on the other hand, was slim and fit. This made me realize that Faye might have been interested in things I didn't know about, another twist to the betrayal that surprised me. My anger began to grow again. Feeling angry helped. It replaced my sadness and cleared my thoughts. I couldn't see any reason for Faye to break our marriage. I believed we had a strong bond, full of care and connection. I had no idea there were any problems. I tightened my jaw, trying to calm my mind. I decided it was time to move on. I couldn't think of any reason Faye could give that would make this okay. To me, my marriage felt over. I set up the drone to record everything. I knew I had to deal with this betrayal, and I wanted to be ready for what was next. I understood that this situation could affect me emotionally and financially, but I was determined. This was the beginning of a new part of my life, one without Faye. I believed that personal responsibility for actions, especially in marriage, had changed. Everything seemed to be no fault now. Our society seemed to have moved past making any real judgments about breaks in trust and commitment. We sure have come a long way, haven't we? But a divorce doesn't just happen in a courtroom. I felt it was important to share the reasons our marriage ended and who was to blame, so I collected what proof I could find. The drone moved in closer, lowering its height until it was just a few feet above the ground. I turned the camera as flat as I could and adjusted my distance until the two women filled the screen. I could see them clearly, but they were focused on their own fun, unaware that the drone was recording them. I didn't think about any permissions, I just wanted to capture the moment. Suddenly, Brianna opened her eyes behind her dark sunglasses and looked up at the camera. To her, the drone probably seemed like a curious bug flying close by. Just for fun, I made the drone move up and down a bit. Brianna's face changed, and I guessed she was expressing surprise. My wife, Faye, noticed and turned to see what caught Brianna's attention. That's the shot I needed, a clear view of Faye's surprised look. Her mouth dropped open as both women reacted in shock, even though I couldn't hear anything. Sadly, the camera didn't record sound. Brianna tried to get up but wobbled a little. After a couple of tries, she steadied herself on the ground and moved to her left, trying to escape the surprise. Faye was taken off guard when she turned to see the action. Taylor quickly realized what was happening nearby and tried to step back. He fumbled and lost his balance, creating a brief moment of chaos at the edge of the pool. Faye and Brianna splashed in the water, both looking confused and a bit startled. Their wide eyes showed they didn't know what to make of it all. "Forget you," I thought dismissively, raising my hand in a way they couldn't see. I lifted the drone higher, moving it around the pool a few times. The battery level on the control unit started to drop, so I carefully moved the drone back until it hovered over the patio. I turned on the motors and climbed as high as I could, doing a loop before quickly coming down. For a moment, the monitor lit up brightly, then it went dark. I wanted to believe the drone had a spectacular ending, even though I doubted it. Still, it was nice to imagine. I sat staring at the blank screen for a while and shrugged at the situation I was in. I looked up at the wall clock. My life changed forever at 12:38 p.m. on Friday, July 5th. Happy holiday to me! I had no idea how my marriage would go from here, and honestly, I hardly cared. To my surprise, it took almost an hour for my wife to travel the short distance from where she had been to our home of the last 18 months. I remembered how hard we worked to gather enough money for the down payment. Paying the mortgage wasn't easy either, but Faye wanted the house as a sign of our success. She had been so joyful when we moved in. At the time, I was happy about it too. Then she decided she needed a new car to show potential buyers around an extravagant choice, while I stuck with an old desktop computer until my company gave me a laptop. Faye got her dream house, and I made do with simpler things. Now, Faye was out exploring her options, while I was at home wondering what had gone wrong in my life. To pass the time while waiting for her, I reviewed the video I had made of the three of them. I even put together a highlight reel, thinking it might be useful someday. When Faye finally walked in, she was furious. Her hair was still wet and hanging over her face. She wore the suit from work, but it was damp in a few spots. It looked like she had lost a shoe somewhere along the way because she was wearing one and carrying the other, which was a bit crooked. "What are you doing?" she yelled, her voice loud and sharp. Her face was bright red with anger, and her eyes were piercing as she looked at me. It seemed she had figured out what happened to the broken drone on the Hennings patio. I had started to wonder, as it had been a while since I had crashed it. I noticed her approach, one I often used during tough talks at work with challenging clients. It appeared Faye had learned that the best way to defend herself was to attack. I let a small smile appear for a moment, which only seemed to upset her more. "You could have harmed someone with that thing!" she yelled. I just watched her, trying to understand the woman I had married. Typically, Faye was very lovely, standing 5 feet 4 inches tall with shoulder-length brown hair framing her heart-shaped face. The person before me, however, in her frustrated state, was not the woman I recognized. "What's wrong with you?" she demanded. I wasn't sure what I expected, maybe an apology or some sign of regret. Clearly not. Maybe I could also take charge of the situation. "This is unacceptable behavior!" I raised my voice, my deep tone echoing in the room. Without giving her a chance to reply, I added, "Please take some time to think about your actions." She seemed to have no response, but turned away and walked upstairs on her one remaining high heel. I wondered why she hadn't taken both shoes off. "And Faye," I called gently, "when you come back down, let's talk about this calmly. You've already caused enough disturbance today, and I won't accept any more shouting, understood?" She didn't answer, but went upstairs without any fuss. A moment later, I heard the shower start. Faye came back down after only 15 minutes, quicker than I expected. Maybe she was ready to settle this. I doubted there would be an apology. If she planned to express regret, it would have taken longer in the shower. My Faye was not one to easily admit she had done something wrong. She wore one of my old long-sleeve sweatshirts and some jeans, trying to downplay what had happened earlier. "Please, have a seat," I said calmly from the living room, pointing to the couch across from me. She took off her sneakers in front of the couch, sat down, and tucked her feet under her. She opened her mouth, but I interrupted. "I'd like to understand a couple of things," I said. "First, why did you choose to act this way?" Faye leaned back a little into the couch. "I'm sorry for how it looked," she said slowly, clearly trying to make things right. "You're sorry for how I saw it," I replied. "But not for what you did, right?" Faye paused for a moment. "We can get through this. I should have talked to you before I see that now." She leaned forward on the couch, her face serious as she tried to close the gap between us. "Listen, Matt, it's not like I was completely new to this when we got married, and neither were you. We both know that. I haven't done anything with Taylor and Brianna that's completely new, mostly things we shared as well." She paused, looking at me closely. "All we need to do is make some changes and everything will be fine." I stayed quiet, my jaw tight, still unsure where she was going with this. It felt like there was no real regret, just an apology for being caught. I motioned for her to keep talking. "And I'm not someone to be treated unfairly," she added, responding to what I had said before. "Don't call me that." I didn't answer. "We were. It was just a casual thing," she continued. "Really?" I said sharply, shaking my head. "I've read about things like this. Did you know there are websites where people who feel hurt by their partners can find support?" I went on. I heard that saying, "It was just an experience," is a common response in these situations. I was wishing for something more creative, Faye. Faye's face tightened. "It really was just an experience," she said sincerely. "That's all it was, just a few people enjoying themselves." "Enjoying themselves," I replied, my voice dripping with bitterness. "Well, I guess I got it wrong. Silly me." My face must have shown more upset than happiness. I leaned in with fake excitement. "You know what? I like to have fun too. So why wasn't I included in this? Fun?" For the first time, Faye looked down, a hint of regret crossing her face, even if just for a moment. "We were going to include you," she whispered. "Oh? Include you?" I repeated sarcastically. "Does that mean maybe someday if you felt like it, you'd let me join? Was that your plan?" She didn't answer right away, so I kept going. "That's not true, is it?" I said firmly. "You never meant for me to find out. This idea of including me is only something you thought of after it all came out." Faye briefly closed her eyes. "Okay," she finally admitted, opening them again. "You're right. We just didn't think. We should have done things differently." "No," I interrupted her. She still didn't get how serious this was. "What you should have done is ask me if we should even consider this as a couple if we were ready to change our commitment to each other." She shot back, frustration clear on her face. "Fine. Yes, I should have done that. I messed up. I'm sorry. Yes, you did mess up, I replied. You made a choice for both of us without thinking about how I would feel. Why was it only your decision? Faye said earnestly, ignoring my question. It's not too late. I understand that I should have talked to you first, and then everything would have been clear. But we can't change what happened now, can we? I shrugged and tried to keep my face calm. For the sake of discussion, I said, why didn't you think to mention it to me at the start? What made you think it was okay to make a choice that would affect us both? She looked away, raising her hands as if to say she didn't know. It seemed she hadn't even thought about needing an answer. Well, I said with a sigh, I just want to understand why you didn't want to discuss this with me from the beginning. Maybe because I didn't think you'd actually go along with it, she replied after a brief pause. Okay, now we're making progress, I said. You thought I wouldn't want to go along with it. If that's true, why didn't you think it was wrong? She stayed quiet. Her face showed how frustrated she was. There were many things Faye was not ready to talk about. Right and wrong were two big ones. So I brought up something I'd mentioned earlier. I guess I'm just the boring one, and you all are the fun ones, the ones who know how to enjoy life, and you're the smart ones you get to do everything that people like me can't, I said. That's not how it was, Faye argued. I just didn't think you would. There it was again. I tried to find a way to help her understand. Okay, so you didn't think I would be okay with this, I said slowly. You thought your husband, your partner, would be against cheating, but you went ahead anyway. Don't I have the right to think that was wrong? How did you think ignoring my feelings would be okay? Faye realized where my questions were leading. She really didn't want to discuss it and shook her head in annoyance. She tried to take back control of the conversation by ignoring my questions and focusing on her own thoughts. Matt, you know I wasn't new to relationships when we met. You even remember who I was with back then, right? And I know who you were with too. It was Caitlin, the girl you dated before I got to know you. See? She looked at me intently. When I didn't respond, she seemed to feel encouraged and thought I had accepted her point. I hadn't, but I was starting to realize that Faye was mixing up things that happened before we committed to each other with things that shouldn't have happened afterward. Matt, I know you aren't someone who holds back or anything. You can't be upset about what happened with Brianna, right? And she hesitated a bit. And what Taylor did wasn't anything you haven't done before, right? So, I interrupted her firmly. No, Faye, it's not about what you did, it's that you did it and you shouldn't have. She didn't like that response. She tried to recover the conversation. But wait, Matt, you just said you wouldn't mind doing something with Brianna. You said that. Faye leaned in closer. It's not too late to make things right, honey. I messed up by not thinking clearly and not including you from the beginning, but we can move past this. She shifted her feet off the couch and leaned forward, trying to show me her sincerity. Listen, Matt, here's what we can do. Faye reached her hand out, trying to connect with me, but it was too far for her to touch me across the space on the carpet. I could tell my face showed my unease. At that moment, all I could think was that I would rather be anywhere else than have Faye touch me. Luckily, she didn't come over. Taylor, Brianna, and I were talking after what happened at their house, Faye said. She was struggling with her words, clearly trying not to say anything that might upset me again. What we can do, Taylor suggested you could be with me and Brianna, or just one of us if you prefer. And for 3 months, Taylor could be with no one but his wife to make up for the time you lost. Her voice faded. It seemed like she was starting to realize how awkward that sounded. So, I guess 3 months is how long this has been going on, right? I asked. Faye nodded slightly. Is that true? 3 months? I pressed, feeling more annoyed. Tell me, I demanded when she hesitated. Yes, just 3 months, Matt, she replied. After a pause, she asked, So, what do you think? Can we fix this and move on? Should I call Brianna now? Her tone was almost begging. Absolutely not, I snapped back. I don't want anything to do with her or with you right now. Who knows what problems might come up after everything that's happened? Faye shrank back against the sofa, clearly taken aback. I cut her off before she could respond. Why? Why did you do this behind my back? She didn't answer right away, still in shock. Why? I shouted again, leaning forward in my chair. Faye's eyes widened. Why did you think this was a good idea when you knew I would hate it? I raised my voice once more. She swallowed hard, gripping the cushion tightly. Why? Faye shook her head as if trying to gather her thoughts. Answer me, why? I pressed again. Because I wanted to, she finally shouted. Why don't you understand, Matt? I wanted to change this situation we're in, and it was something I enjoyed doing too, she added. I did it because I could and because I wanted to. She took a deep breath and glared at me. This is my choice, she continued, waving her arms. Just me. This is my decision. Gets to say who does what to my body and nobody else. I looked at her for a moment. Faye, I don't understand. Where did you get these ideas? You're so much smarter than this. Who's been putting these thoughts in your head? She didn't answer. I decided to go on. Yes, I agree, I told her calmly. You absolutely have the right to say who is involved with you, but when we got married, you chose to make that commitment with me, didn't you? I paused, letting my words sink in. She didn't seem happy with my reminder. But I have rights too, Faye, I said. For instance, I have the right to decide if I'm okay with what's happening now. I paused, waiting to see if she had anything to say, but she stayed silent. Just so you know, I continued, right now, I'm thinking this marriage might be over. To me, what we had feels like it's gone. She looked surprised, as if she hadn't thought I might end things because of this. It struck me as strange. Faye was smarter than the way she was acting, and I didn't understand where she was coming from. So, that's it? I asked calmly. No sense of responsibility, no respect for our marriage. You didn't think about honesty and loyalty? She shook her head, tears starting to fall, though they seemed more out of frustration than regret. Just, I wanted to do it. Is that it? She didn't respond. Well, I said with a heavy sigh, that sums things up, doesn't it? Forget it! She suddenly yelled, clearly overwhelmed. She didn't say anything and left quickly, leaving me alone with my thoughts. My anger grew as I watched her walk away. I went to my home office and opened my laptop. I had been thinking deeply. I knew enough to understand my situation. She showed no real regret, only concern for how things looked. I hadn't shared everything with Faye. I learned online that revealing an affair could help bring clarity. I wasn't sure if I wanted to save my marriage, but I could take charge of what happened next. I looked over the evidence I had gathered, feeling determined about my next actions. I thought of Rutherford, the owner of the real estate company where she worked. Thank you for calling Rutherford Real Estate. How can I help you? An older man said when I connected. I recognized his voice. It seemed he had given his secretary the afternoon off. Mr. Rutherford? I said, keeping my tone serious. This is Matt Singletary, Faye's husband. Yes, Matt, he replied warmly. His company had a great month with home sales just before Labor Day last year. To celebrate, he hosted a big picnic on a piece of land he owned outside town. Everyone from the agency, along with their families, attended. We had chatted for a long time about various topics. Sir, I started slowly, unsure how to approach the topic. Mr. Rutherford, do you have an email address where I can send you something important? It's a short video that needs your immediate attention, I said formally. Of course, son, he responded. And just call me Martin, okay? In moments, I had his personal email address. I sent Martin a message and included a video I made of the events from earlier today involving my wife, Taylor, and his wife. I waited for Martin to read the email and understand what it said. Oh my God, he finally said. I'm so sorry, Matt. I had no idea. Neither did I, Martin, I replied calmly. But I want to point something out. This happened just after noon today. Check the timestamp in the corner. It started earlier, but I only know when it ended, which is shown at the end of the video. The important part is, one of your managers and his wife were meeting with my wife. This took place during work hours, so they were using your time. He was quiet for a long moment. I could tell he realized this was a serious problem, one that could lead to a lawsuit. The actions of those involved caused me significant distress. That's often how legal matters begin, right? Since it happened while they were supposed to be working, Mr. Rutherford's company could be in trouble. But I hadn't talked about that yet. I'm open to suggestions, he said carefully. Oh, I don't have any suggestions, I replied. It's your business, and I'm just sharing what I found. What you decide to do with this information is up to you. I understand, he said, sounding uncertain. Exactly, Mr. Rutherford. I will be divorcing my wife, so this has led to the end of our marriage. But what happens with your employees is completely up to you. Okay? Well, I need to get off the line now. I have some important things to do, as Grandma used to say. Goodbye, sir, and thank you for your kindness, I said to him. Well, goodbye to you too, Matt. I'm really sorry this happened. It's not your fault, Mr. Rutherford. Some people just lack integrity. Goodbye, sir. I ended the call and moved on to the next task on my list. I created a group text with Faye's family, including her brothers, sisters, mother, father, and all her friends whose phone numbers I had, as well as neighbors who had shared their numbers with us. I sent the same video I had sent to Mr. Rutherford to the group. Then I waited. The truth about these three people was about to come out, and their carefree world was about to change. Faye slowly came down the stairs and paused at the bottom, holding on to the railing. I figured she wanted to talk to me again and change my mind. Sweetheart, she began, you're making too big a deal out of this. We're all adults. A small mistake won't ruin our marriage. I love you, and you know that, right? I would never do anything to hurt you. I just made a mistake. I should have talked to you from the start. I'm really sorry. And I want to make things right, okay? I sat back in my chair and listened without really paying attention. Nothing she said would change anything now. The phone in the kitchen rang loudly. Faye looked at it but didn't move. You should get that, I said calmly. It might be for you. Faye stepped to the left, just inside the kitchen doorway, and picked up the phone. Oh, hi, Dad. I can't talk right now. Can I call you? I thought Mr. Rutherford would call first, but her dad was faster. I could hear him from across the room. What are you doing, Faye Ann? He yelled. Why is there a video of you with someone inappropriate? In public? Faye turned and stared at me, her face showing shock. I wasn't sure if she was even breathing for a moment. It looked like her whole world was starting to fall apart. Remember what you said, Faye? I said, loud enough for her to hear. You did what you did because you could, and because it was fun, right? I reminded her. She looked at me blankly. She was listening to her dad's displeasure but didn't seem to understand what he was saying. Well, sweetie, I continued, I did this just like you said. I did it because I could, and I have to tell you it was much more fun than I expected. That last part was just me being mean, but I wasn't feeling generous. Her phone, given to her by Mr. Rutherford's job, started playing a Star Wars tune and danced across the coffee table. I picked it up, tapped the screen to answer, and walked over to give it to her. Here, this is for you, I said. She took it mechanically in her right hand while still holding her dad's phone with her left. Mr. Rutherford was clearly upset too. Faye didn't have the phone on speaker, but I could hear him just as clearly. In strong words, but without any bad language, he never cursed. He told my soon-to-be ex-wife that her job was over as of that moment. Asswipes. He also said that if Faye wanted to pick up her last check and her things, she needed to hurry. She had half an hour to get to the office, or the doors would be locked, and she wouldn't be allowed in again. He would send everything to her by mail. I stepped outside and backed my 12-year-old Land Rover up to the porch. I was going to load a lot of my things into it, so I wanted to make the trip as short as possible. I didn't mind the deep ruts the big tires would leave in the grass. I didn't live there anymore, so the lawn was no longer my concern. A couple of minutes later, Faye burst out of the front door, expressing her feelings very loudly. She repeated herself several times until she got into her car, started the engine, and drove off quickly. I scoffed. My parents had been married for 3 years before I was born. I definitely wasn't a mistake, but I didn't care about her opinions anymore. My phone beeped, and then it rang several times in a row. I had sent a video to a group message, and now I was getting a lot of replies and comments. A quick look at the texts showed that Faye was being criticized by her brother and sisters, as well as her other relatives and friends. I loaded up all my clothes and some personal items. It made a small pile that fit easily in the Land Rover. On my last trip through the house to check for anything I might have missed, I put on a hidden holster, checked the Glock Model 38 I usually carried, and tucked it under my shirt. The house felt unfriendly now. I wanted to be prepared. When I was done, I made a quick call to my mom and dad and gave them a brief update on the afternoon's events. I asked if I could stay with them for a while. They only wanted to know if I would arrive in time for dinner or if they should keep something warm in the oven. It felt good to know there was someone I could count on in the world. Chapter 3. Looking back at that day and the next week, I was surprised by how quickly everything changed. It was a big shift for me. Faye showed no regret, and thinking about whether to work on our marriage didn't slow me down at all. I didn't waste time debating what to do. I was good at solving problems quickly in my job. While others liked to spend ages discussing every detail, I made choices and took action. Most of the time, my decisions worked out. Sometimes, looking back, I could see they weren't the best choices, but they were always better than waiting too long. This saved the company time and effort that would have been lost in endless discussions. Faye thought I was making too big of a deal out of things. She believed she could make choices about our marriage without thinking about how it affected me. That felt very unfair. I didn't stop to think about what I should do. I just followed what felt right for me. I acted on my feelings, regardless of whether it was the best choice. I've heard that love and dislike can be closely related. Maybe that's true. I was surprised to realize my love for Faye was fading by the end of our talk. What little affection I had left disappeared quickly in the following days. I remembered loving her, but it felt like a fading echo. At first, everything seemed bright and full of life, but as it faced challenges, it faded away until only a faint echo remained, and eventually that too vanished. I focused on what I thought was best: getting a divorce. Part of my plan was to escape the huge debt from the big house we bought and Faye's high-priced car so we could move on with our own lives. My main goal was to leave this situation with both of our credit scores as safe as possible. A couple of weeks after I shared everything, I called Faye's dad, who was still really angry with his daughter and with me too, for what he called the drama. Eventually, I calmed him down and talked about what was best for both Faye and me as individuals. He understood my choice not to try to save the marriage, even if Faye was willing to. This meant that we needed to sell the house quickly. I could have managed the mortgage payments by living carefully, but I didn't want to do that. I would rather quit my job than pay for a house I never wanted. Faye, who was just starting as a real estate agent, had a small salary and earned a commission on any property she sold, but she hadn't sold anything. After everything that happened, she didn't even have that small income, so she couldn't afford the house either. It was easy to convince Faye's dad that we needed to list the house for sale right away, because if I ran out of money and stopped making mortgage payments, the house would quickly be taken back by the bank. This would hurt both our credit scores and affect us for years. The same applied to Faye's fancy car. I told her dad I wouldn't make the payments, and she couldn't, so it needed to be sold fast. We didn't own any part of the house, and we owed more on the Lexus than it was worth. But taking action now would help us in the future when our marriage would be just a memory. Faye's father agreed with my plan and convinced her too. He clearly told Faye that if she didn't accept what I proposed, I would leave everything behind. I would take my savings, fill my car, and go away, leaving her to handle everything. In the end, we managed to sell the house fairly quickly. I had to cover some of the realtor's fees that I usually wouldn't have had to pay, but it wasn't too much. I traded Faye's Lexus for a 6-year-old Ford, paid the extra amount in cash, and gave the car to Faye. Now she had a vehicle to use. However, she was responsible for the insurance and maintenance. I felt that was all I could do. Once it was all settled, I had what was left of my retirement savings and a little money from our checking account. Best of all, I had no major debts to worry about. Mission accomplished. We went with a do-it-yourself divorce since we couldn't afford a lawyer. I filled out the papers and tried to split things fairly. I was surprised that Faye easily agreed to my suggestions, considering how difficult she had been when I first talked to her. Clearly, someone helped her see that arguing over our small amount of shared property wouldn't help either of us. Thankfully, we hadn't had children, so custody and support were not issues. There was no need for spousal support either, as we hadn't been married long enough to qualify for that. The DIY divorce only cost a couple of $100 and had a short waiting period. So 4 months, 1 week, and a few days after I discovered what was happening, we were officially done. After my divorce was finalized, I tucked away all my feelings and memories of my marriage, sealing them behind a door in my mind that I labeled "Faye, do not open," and moved on to the next part of my life. That Christmas, just after I received the final paperwork, was not too bad. I spent it with my mom and dad. It was quiet but comforting. We exchanged gifts, enjoyed a big turkey dinner, and in the evening we visited some friends and a few distant relatives. A week into the new year, I left my job with Reese Donaldson. It was a good job, and I was treated well there. Mr. Donaldson thought I was taking another job and offered me a higher salary to stay, but I had to say no. I assured him it wasn't about another opportunity. I just wasn't excited about business anymore and wanted to pursue something different. He understood, though it was clear he wished I would stay, and he even organized a nice farewell party for me. He told me to call him if I ever changed my mind before moving on. By Valentine's Day, I was without a job and unsure of what was next. Yet I felt happy and content with myself and my life. I was sitting at my mom's kitchen table, watching my dad carve a mountain lion from a piece of wood while my mom cooked dinner. Dad was very skilled at wood carving, and my mom could have been an excellent chef with the right training. They both meant a lot to me. Dad wasn't my biological father. He was my Uncle Tom, my dad's younger brother. My mom was his wife, Leah. They took me in after my parents died in a car accident when I was 9 years old. Tom and Leah had no children of their own when they welcomed me, and I remained their only child since one of them was unable to have kids. They never tried to find out whether it was Tom or Leah who couldn't have children. They simply didn't want to know. They believed that knowing the truth might bring some blame, and they didn't want that negativity hurting their relationship. They cared for each other too much to let anything bad get in the way. They treated me with kindness and love. Through their support, I slowly got over the loss of my parents. It wasn't easy or quick, but in time, I began to heal. Dad, or Uncle Tom, already had a strong reputation as a determined sheriff when I moved in with them. He worked hard to keep his county safe from troublemakers and those involved in illegal activities. He had been sheriff for just over 21 years when he decided to retire. The first time I saw him with a tear in his eye was the day he drove me to school in his patrol car. I proudly introduced him to everyone as my dad, and I truly meant it. One night, Aunt Leah supervised a school dance when I was a sophomore. I made sure everyone knew that I wanted my mom to dance with me before I asked any girls. The girls and teachers thought it was sweet. I just felt it was the right way to show how much I cared for my mom. The night I asked them to adopt me, they could only hold each other and cry, and that made me cry too. We were very close, and I only thought of them as my real parents from then on. "What we're doing is giving you your inheritance now," Dad said. "Instead of making you wait until we're gone, you'll have it now while you're still young and can do something with it." He was talking about giving me the title to the ranch. At 53 and 51 years old, Dad and Mom decided they wanted to buy a big RV and travel around the country. They had already bought the RV, along with a smaller car to use when they parked. Their first stop was going to be Glacier National Park, then the Grand Canyon. They had a whole list of places they wanted to see. "But Dad," I said quietly, "this is too much. I know you want to travel, but you also need a home to come back to, a place to rest when you're tired of moving all the time." "We understand, son," Dad replied. "That's why we got the house up in the northern part of the city. It'll always be there when we need it. And just between us, your mom and I don't really want to keep this place anymore." "We didn't plan to farm or care for animals when I retired from my job," Dad continued. "This was just a place to settle down. But now we feel it's time to move on. Do you see what I mean?" "Oh, I get it," I said, pretending to be upset. "So you want to leave me with this place because you're done with it, huh?" "No, that's not it," Dad said calmly. "The land is tired and not good for farming anymore, and the water sources have dried up, so we can't raise animals either. But some companies have been showing interest in the land and have made offers. They will come back to talk again. You could sell it for a good price." I paused to think. A long time ago, the property started as one large piece of land, 640 acres, plus another 300 acres nearby. My grandpa, my dad's father, bought a piece of land from a widow when he moved here, and later, he bought another piece after a really good harvest. My dad never liked farming. That's why he chose to work in law enforcement. He didn't want to spend long hours working on the farm. He had been selling parts of the land whenever he could, and now we only had about 500 acres left from the original 1 mile square. The other 300 acres went to a neighboring farmer. "Okay, Dad, I'll help with it," I said. "But it does seem like a lot of work. What if I take care of it, sell it off, and then we can share the earnings 3 ways, you, me, and Mom? Does that sound good? How about an 8,020 split? You can update us by email twice a week and call us every Sunday, my mom added in a straightforward way. She came over to where I was sitting and looked at me seriously. I was leaning back in my chair. She wrapped her arms around my head and kissed my forehead. "We love you, son," she said softly. "Please let us help with this." I looked at my dad. He was focused on his carving and didn't seem to notice me. He didn't need to respond. Mom was now in charge of the discussion, and Dad knew that I couldn't say no to her. I decided to stand my ground a little. What if it was a 5,050 split? I'll keep in touch regularly and call on Sundays, holidays, and birthdays, too, I proposed. "Deal," Mom replied immediately. "Now put that chair down and go get cleaned up for dinner," she instructed. She glanced at Dad. "Tom." Dad had already picked up his carving tools and was heading out of the kitchen to the garage where he kept his supplies and projects. I rushed to get cleaned up and help Mom set the table. This took place in early April, the year after I found Faye with someone else. I stood on the porch of my parents' old house and watched them drive their new home slowly up the gravel road toward the highway 3 miles away. Their big vehicle had all kinds of modern comforts inside, like a shower and a queen-sized bed. They were towing a small car behind them so they could park and explore local sites or whatever they felt like doing that day. When they reached the top of the hill a mile away and disappeared out of sight, I sighed and went back inside. The house no longer felt like home. From the outside, it looked like a typical old farmhouse built around 1930. Dad had chosen not to make the house attractive to trouble, given his law enforcement background. Inside, the home was filled with everything we needed. The living room had a large TV, and Dad had installed a great sound system. The furniture was cozy and inviting, making the whole place comfortable. At the back, Dad had built a big wooden deck with a grill because he and Mom loved to barbecue. We also had a nice pool that was 20 feet by 35 feet, deep enough for diving and large enough for Mom to swim laps whenever she wanted. She had been on the swim team in high school and really enjoyed swimming for exercise. A few days after they left, I finished checking everything in the house, the farm equipment, and the animals. I had 14 horses, a small herd of 23 buffalo, and 47 longhorn cattle. At one time, Grandpa had planned to create a nature park. Plus, I had the contents of both barns on the property. I began to sell everything I could except for the furniture in the house. The first item I sold was a big tractor I had parked by the gate on the main road. I received a good amount of money for it, and both I and the farmer who bought it felt pleased with the deal. After that, I thought I'd try selling everything else the same way. It worked out well. The people passing by on that road were mostly farmers or ranchers, and if they weren't interested in buying, they knew someone who might be. Soon, my farm and ranch equipment was selling quickly. One Friday in May, I received a call on the house phone. At first, I thought it was my mom, since it was her turn to check in. "Hello," I said cheerfully. "How's everyone doing?" "Good afternoon, is this Mr. Singletary?" I quickly realized it wasn't my mom. The young woman's voice sounded a bit condescending, like she thought she was doing me a favor by talking to me. I remembered my dad used to carry out his work as sheriff by sometimes speaking in a funny Texas accent to confuse suspects. They often didn't realize what was happening until it was too late. "Yes, ma'am," I replied slowly. "That's Matt Singletary at your service." "Please hold for Mr. Wingate." Then the line went quiet, and I decided to hang up. About 3 minutes later, the phone rang again. "Mr. Singletary?" the same woman asked, sounding a bit annoyed. "Yep, that's me," I answered. "Are you still holding on to that fellow Winslate?" I pretended to be curious. No, Mr. Singletary, I meant for you to hold on, not—" "Oh, I'm truly sorry, but I can't do that. I only hold on to ladies. I don't think it's right for a man to hold on to another man, don't you think?" A moment of silence followed, filled with a surprised breath from the young woman. No, sir. What I meant was—" "Could you please wait just a moment? I need to get Mr. Wingate on the phone," she said. "Of course. How far do you need to go to reach him?" I asked, curious. "He'll be with you soon," she replied, not answering my question. In reality, it took longer than just soon. I guessed she shared the main points of our earlier talk with Mr. Wingate, so he'd know what was going on. Good afternoon, Mr. Singletary. I'm George Wingate from Christopher Stamp and Presley. How are you today? I'm doing quite well, thanks. And how are Christy, Bump, and Elvis? I thought I heard a quiet laugh from a woman on the line, but maybe I imagined it. We're all good, thank you for asking. Can I call you Tom? Well, I suppose you can, I answered. But my real name is Matt. It's actually Matthew, but people just call me Matt. Okay, Mr. Wingate said. Can I please speak to Tom? No, I replied firmly. There was a pause. May I ask why not? Wingate sounded a bit annoyed. He's not here, I said. Another silence followed. Before Mr. Wingate could respond, I thought I had shared enough and was starting to lose interest. My father gave me the whole ranch, signed it over to me before he went on a trip with my mother. Should I pass along a message for them? No, it seems like you are exactly who we need to speak to. Your father transferred the title to you, right? I hadn't called him Pa at any point, so I knew I was getting into his head. He was trying to get back at me and show some disrespect. I smiled. Yes, he really did, I told Mr. Wingate. Well, Matt, he continued, a team from Sun Cloud Petroleum was near your property a few days ago. They noticed you are selling some of your farm equipment. We were wondering if— Oh, no, I interrupted. I'm really sorry, but the John Deere has already been sold to Mr. Jenkins at Whisper Lake, and so has the hay baler and other tools. However, there are still plenty of things I could sell you if you're interested. No, Wingate quickly cut in. He paused. Matt, we want to know if we can talk to you about selling your ranch. That's what you're doing, right? We represent SunCloud, and we would like to make you a good offer for your land. Can we give you a round-trip ticket to Oklahoma City from your local airport to discuss this in more detail? Why would I want to go to Oklahoma City? I asked, confused. Well, that's where SunCloud and our firm are based, Mr. Singletary. Wow, I laughed. You really had me there. But I can't fly on airplanes. I feel sick every time I try, I explained. Why don't you and anyone else you want to bring just come to my place whenever you can? After thinking it over, he might have started looking for a date that worked. Perhaps he even had the young woman I spoke to earlier checking other calendars too. It was a long pause. Eventually, he returned to the line, and we agreed that the following Thursday would work for them to visit me. I took a moment before calling a lawyer who handled large property sales. He knew a lot about land and mineral rights and was already hired for help. In June, the third meeting was happening with Mr. Wingate and several lawyers from the law firm representing SunCloud Petroleum. My lawyer, Carl Patterson, sat next to me, and some assistants were connected online. I couldn't see them, but they listened and watched through my lawyer's laptop camera. From where I sat, the meeting was going really well. The oil company had made better offers in our earlier talks. In their last call, they made a deal that made Carl smile with joy. He joked about being Jed Clampett, and I could tell he was a bit disappointed when I didn't play along. Carl believed the offer they gave was the best they could do. I agreed, and we planned this meeting to finish the paperwork. There were no last-minute surprises, and it seemed like Wingate and his team were ready to wrap things up. All right, then, I said, pretending to check the documents. Carl had already given his nod, so I was just acting for fun. You all are saying I have 181 days from today to finish selling all the furniture and other things, right? Absolutely, Matt, Wingate said with a reassuring tone. You have 6 months plus 1 day? Great! Let's move on, I replied, dropping my act. But Wingate didn't notice. I picked up the pen from one of Wingate's assistants and signed where needed on the stack of papers. It took a little while since there were 2 copies of everything and several places to sign in each set. Sherry Woodward, Wingate's paralegal, was helping me. She was very skilled, and I was sure she was sharper than her boss. Earlier, when she first arrived, she started looking around at everything. I noticed how she admired all the modern appliances, how clean and shiny the floors were, and everything else in the room. She was also taken by the beautiful pool and the deck behind the house. When she spotted my degree in business management framed on the wall right next to my MBA, she tilted her head in surprise. The things she saw did not match the simple image I was trying to create in Mr. Wingate's mind. After taking a moment, she stepped away from the kitchen door that led to the pool, briefly moistening her lips. I thought she might say something to Mr. Wingate when he asked her to get something from his briefcase in the SUV. I couldn't hear exactly what he wanted, but he told her to bring it to him without delay. His tone was quite commanding, and I knew I wouldn't have responded well. But when she returned, Miss Woodward didn't say a word to Mr. Wingate. Now, Sherry Woodward stood close behind me as she leaned over to point out where I needed to sign. Up close, she looked even better than from a distance and was quite tall. She had a nice scent, too, and I appreciated having her nearby. When I reached the last signature, I looked up at her and winked my left eye. Wingate and his group couldn't see me from where they were sitting. Sherry had to hold back a laugh with a small cough, covering her mouth with her hand. It was all finished. I handed the pen back to her and gave my copy of the documents to my lawyer. Then I waited. We had planned it with Mr. Wingate and his team that once the last document was signed, they would transfer the money to my bank right away. It wasn't typical, but since they thought I was inexperienced with business matters, they agreed. I had everything arranged with my bank to receive the funds and be ready for a transfer right after they came in. I thought Wingate was a bit gullible and might not be trustworthy. My lawyer turned his laptop around to show me the screen, and I typed in my password before pressing enter. The money deposited by Wingate's team was quickly sent to another account, closing the original one. Maybe I was just being cautious, but sometimes you have to watch out for yourself. "It's been interesting working with you, Mr. Wingate," I said to the man I would always think of as Old Numbnuts. I offered my hand as I stood up. "Just so you know, Mr. Wingate, not everyone who speaks with a Texas accent is slow or foolish. Sometimes it's just how people feel comfortable speaking." I saw understanding begin to show on his face. "And just to let you know," I continued, "I would have happily sold you the property for half of what you just paid if you hadn't acted so proud," I said with a grin. I knew that word would spread around his office, and not everyone there was loyal to him. Yes, I realize it was a bit petty and maybe childish, but it felt good. As they left for their big black SUVs, some of them struggled to hide their smiles. One guy couldn't hold back his grin for long, letting it show as soon as Wingate got into the back seat. Sherry lingered for a moment just inside the door, enough time for me to invite her to dinner. She nodded and gave me a piece of paper with her phone number and the name of the hotel where they were staying. Sherry and I had a great time that evening. I took her to the best restaurant in town since I could afford it now. Afterward, we went to a nightclub I knew about. It had a mix of music, including some slow songs that were really fun to dance to with Miss Sherry Woodward. When we got back to my home, we talked about Mr. Wingate for a long time. Well, we actually did that over breakfast. Chapter 4. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do with my life from that point on, but I knew flying would be part of it. I took some refresher courses to get my pilot's certificate back. This included ground school for instruments, and I flew with an instructor for a while to practice again. My Uncle Jake, my mom's older brother who taught me to fly, had passed away 6 years ago. He left everything to my mom, which included 5 small planes parked behind what we called the North Barn, about 3/4 of a mile from our house. I hired 3 aircraft mechanics to help get all 5 planes ready for their safety checks. It didn't take long. I paid them well for the job and not by the hour, so they had plenty of time to work on my planes. The 5 single-engine planes passed their inspections easily, and I started selling them to dealers. I kept one for a private pilot who wanted to fly more without spending a lot on rentals. I gave him a great deal because he reminded me of myself. I didn't make a lot of money from selling Uncle Jake's planes, but I didn't expect to, nor did I need to. In the end, I had only 1 plane left, and I wasn't even trying to sell it. I loved taking to the sky for an hour or two, just me and the plane. I was sitting at a picnic table in the shade of a big pecan tree outside an old building. A small sign in front said simply, "Jesse's." To the locals who came here, that was all they needed to know. Jesse was an old man who looked like he had been through a lot, but nobody knew his exact age, and it didn't matter. Jesse's made the best barbecue you could find, but only locals and a few travelers knew about it. Late August is hot in Texas, but just before noon, with the tall pecan trees' branches overhead and a light breeze, it felt pleasant. A gentle stream of smoke rose from the smokers in the back, making people hungry for miles around. Even with the building looking a bit worn down, it was so clean that you could eat off the floors. I came here as often as I could, since it was the best route between the city and my parents' house, my house now. I was still getting used to thinking of it that way. Today, I wasn't going to or from anywhere special. I just had a craving for some good Texas brisket. I flew here using Uncle Jake's old Cessna 172. There was a big open area of grass next to Jesse's place, and he didn't mind me using part of it as a landing spot. Outside, there were several picnic tables under the trees for everyone to use, and I was sitting at one, enjoying the day and a delicious lunch. I was finishing a big brisket sandwich while enjoying some borracho beans and mustard potato salad. As I ate, I thought about going back inside for a piece of the pecan pie that Jesse made fresh every day. I figured I worked hard every day and burned off plenty of calories, so a little pie wouldn't hurt me. At least, that was what I told myself. Maybe it was true. I wasn't really paying attention to my surroundings. I could hear cars passing by on the old two-lane road beside me, but I wasn't looking closely. The heat rising from the asphalt was too distracting. I did notice when a few cars full of young people pulled into the parking lot, but I didn't feel curious enough to glance their way, even though I could hear their laughs and chatter. I was just 30, and with everything I'd been through, I felt out of place with people in their 20s. I kept eating and sneaking glances at Jesse's entrance. The brisket was so good I couldn't stop thinking about it, along with thoughts of that tasty pecan pie. There were voices coming from a couple of tables where the young patrons sat, but I didn't really listen until I heard something interesting. "You're just going to walk over there and sit with that person?" said a voice I didn't know. "Really? What if—" someone else said, sounding surprised. That caught my attention. I was wearing a pair of comfy cargo shorts and an old shirt, topped off with a cream-colored Stetson, common in rural Texas. I looked around, curious about who they were talking about. "He's my ex-husband," replied a familiar voice, cutting off the chatter. I recognized that voice. I turned my head to see my ex-wife walking confidently toward me. My first thought, which wasn't very nice, was, "Oh no, what does she want?" She stopped a few steps away from my table. "I know you might not like me," she began, "but could I sit and talk with you for a minute?" I set down the rest of my brisket sandwich and took off my sunglasses so she could see my eyes. My mom taught me it was polite. I did it without thinking much anymore. "I don't dislike you, Faye," I said quietly. Her friends were close enough to hear if I spoke loudly, but I didn't want them to know what we were talking about. "I regret some of the things you've done," I continued, "but disliking you would be too hard on me. It takes too much time and energy. So no, I don't dislike you at all." I held out my right hand, palm up, fingers pointing to the seat across from me. "Sure, please sit," I added. "Well, I wouldn't blame you if you did," she said with a sigh as she sat down across from me. I really went off track for a while. I stayed quiet. From my view, that was definitely true, but I didn't need to say it again. She already knew how I felt about it. After a moment, she took off her sunglasses and placed them on the table near mine, showing me her bright green eyes. "How've you been, Matt?" she asked, breaking the silence. "Doing pretty well, thanks," I replied lightly. "And you?" "I'm good. I'm going to night school, but you know that. Dad says he told you. I'll be starting next semester at UT. I want to be a physician's assistant." "Excellent," I replied. "Glad things are looking up," I added. I wasn't sure what else to say. I wasn't really interested in her life anymore. It wasn't my job to support her. "So, Matt, I know with all that happened, I never told you I was sorry for what I did, but I really am. Like I said, I wouldn't blame you if you didn't like me, but I hope you can forgive me one day." "I really don't dislike you, Faye," I interrupted. "And I've already forgiven you." I took a moment to gather my thoughts. I shrugged. I just don't have the time or energy for negative feelings. They would take over my life, Faye, and lead me nowhere. Feeling upset all the time would make everything else in the world look bad. And life's too short for that. "Okay, thank you for saying that," she replied. She leaned a bit closer to me on the bench. "I'm seeing a counselor," she said quietly. I nodded. "I think I'm making some progress," she continued. "She's helped me see that my choices affect more people than just me," she added. I nodded again. "If I had known how hard things would be, I wouldn't have done what I did. I'm really sorry for how that impacted you." I frowned when she said that. Without meaning to, I shifted uncomfortably on the hard bench. Faye noticed my reaction and felt my disapproval. "What's wrong?" she asked, a little annoyed. "I'm trying to apologize and show you I'm trying to be better now. I know I shouldn't have acted like I did back then." "Faye, I think your counselor may be missing something if that's all she's helping you understand. Maybe that's just a start and there's more for her to teach." I paused to think. To me, when you say you wouldn't do something because the consequences are too tough, it sounds like you're only thinking about the bad outcomes, so you won't repeat the mistakes. She looked even more upset. I was beginning to doubt if she had really changed. "But Faye," I added as softly as I could, "don't you see? That's a sort of thinking about risks, isn't it? You're saying you won't do something because you're afraid of facing serious problems. Do you see what I mean?" I stretched my left leg out and adjusted myself a bit. I was getting ready to leave soon. But I remember reading that integrity is doing the right thing when no one is watching. I don't think, Faye, until you and your counselor understand that you shouldn't give in to temptation. Just because it feels wrong, you might be tempted in the future. On that day, if the situation seems safe or the consequences seem small, you may make a bad choice. Do you see what I mean? She took a deep breath. She seemed annoyed, but maybe she was listening. I couldn't really tell. To me, I continued, there are temptations every day for everyone, and we all make mistakes. But if someone doesn't learn to ignore these temptations without even thinking about it, then it can lead to a problem. Like this. She stared at me, looking a bit frustrated and ready to respond. "Well, I guess I'm just not as perfect as some people," she said sharply. She stepped back, biting her lips. Her expression changed, and she tried to calm down. She shook her head, took a deep breath, and let it out slowly. "I cared for you, Matt," she said, shifting the topic. "Whether you believe it or not, I really did. And I cared for you," I replied quickly. "I showed it by never letting you down." If she could get upset, so could I. She flinched and looked away. "But telling my family and everyone else, you call that love?" I scoffed lightly. "Isn't that blaming the messenger, Faye? I just pointed out what you and others were doing." It was like lifting a rock and watching little creatures run away. I was getting frustrated. I took a deep breath and relaxed my jaw and shoulders. "About everything that happened," I said calmly. "I was just following your rules." She frowned and raised her eyebrows. "Remember, Faye, you said you chose that path because you could and because you enjoyed it. I did the same. Do you know how hard it's been for me since you told everyone?" Faye started to defend herself again. "That wasn't my concern," I replied quickly. "You didn't think about my feelings. You didn't care about what I would go through, did you?" She looked down and didn't answer. I suddenly felt done talking. This was getting painful, and I didn't see the point in going over things that were better in the past. I put my sunglasses back on, stepped away from the table, and stood up. "Faye, I know I shouldn't have brought all that up. It was just on my mind. The counselor would have talked about it in her own time. I hope I didn't ruin her plan. And I need to go. Enjoy your lunch, okay? It was good to see you." I took a step back to clear the picnic table, but paused and turned back to Faye. "And Faye, I loved you very much, but you took that away from me one day. All I have left is the memory of loving you. I wish there was more, but that's all there is. Goodbye, Faye." I turned left and walked along the low wall behind the picnic area. When I was past it, I turned slightly left again and walked confidently toward the gate leading out to the open field and my little plane. I tossed the rest of my meal into a trash can as I walked by. I wasn't hungry anymore, not even for the big slice of pecan pie I had been looking forward to. I knew I would regret missing it later. I would be frustrated for leaving before enjoying the treat I had promised myself, but I needed a break from my ex-wife, possibly for good, and I wanted to be somewhere she wasn't. When I first thought about flying from the ranch to Jesse's instead of driving for an hour on winding Texas roads, I tried hard to find the owner of the land on the other side of the fence from Jesse's. I wanted to ask permission to land my Cessna there, but I could never track down the woman listed in the county records. So I decided to use the open field as my temporary landing spot, leaving the question of permissions for later. If the owner ever complained, I would stop landing there and apologize sincerely. Jessie's place was separated from the large area of grassland by a barbed wire fence with a 15-foot gate, only about 30 yards from Jessie's main entrance. The gate must have been put there long ago to allow livestock to be loaded or unloaded. It was made of sturdy steel, and while the steel itself hadn't rusted, the hinges and latch had seen better days. When I first thought about flying into Jessie's, I looked at the gate, noticed what was wrong, and bought new parts. I spent most of a day fixing it by myself. Now it was a nice, wide gate with working hinges and a strong latch. As I got closer, I saw a woman leaning against the gate, her hands resting on the top bar. She had beautiful, thick black hair that looked glossy in the sunlight. Her hair fell all the way down to her waist and shone brightly. I felt an immediate urge to touch her hair. She was of average height, around 5 feet, 6 inches, and had a slender build. Her legs were toned and her ankles delicate, which made her feet look graceful. I've always admired strong legs, and it was clear she worked hard to stay fit. As I approached, I noticed her figure was well balanced. A smile of appreciation came to my face, making me forget the frustrating conversation I just had with my ex-wife. I stood a few yards to her left so I wouldn't startle her. "It's a Cessna." I began to explain the model to her, but she interrupted. "It's a little airplane," she said matter-of-factly, turning to look at me. She shifted her sunglasses down and met my gaze with her stunning crystal blue eyes, which seemed to sparkle with laughter. "It is," I answered, returning her smile. "It only has a couple of seats and isn't as fast as the race cars at the racetrack, but it flies straight and gets to its destination much quicker than a car," I explained. I had never really talked this much before, but this amazing woman brought it out in me. I couldn't help but smile. She looked just as beautiful when she faced me as she did when she gazed out over the prairie. I tried hard to keep my focus on her eyes, but I could feel her confident presence shining brightly. With her dark hair and light caramel skin, I guessed she had Mexican roots, but her blue eyes hinted at some Irish heritage, too. The mix of both was stunning. I was eager to learn more about her. I checked there wasn't a ring on her finger. We talked for a little while about the airplane, the sky, and the barbecue, whatever came to her mind. I felt good about myself for being able to hold a decent conversation without saying anything too silly. "You're a pilot?" she asked. "I am," I replied. "You don't look like a pilot," she said, studying me. "My pilot uniform is in the cleaners right now," I said with a slight grin, along with my superhero outfits. She gently tapped my arm. She had been moving a bit closer to me, or maybe I was leaning in. I wasn't sure, but her touch felt exciting. I wanted to know more about her. "I really am a pilot," I said. "I just flew here from the ranch to get some of Jessie's barbecue because I love it and I've been thinking about it for the last 3 nights. I smiled, feeling happy. "It is good," she agreed with a nod. "So, would you like to go for a ride?" I asked brightly. "A ride?" she repeated, sounding playful. "You want me to go for a ride in your small airplane?" It seemed like she had been waiting for me to ask, which felt good. I definitely wanted to get to know her better. "Of course," I replied. "I have a Mustang at the ranch. We can be there in 20 minutes in the plane, and I'd love to see you riding her, your hair flying behind you." I really meant it, and could clearly imagine it happening. She looked into my eyes for a moment, then turned away to call her friends. "Julie!" she shouted with a strong voice that carried well. Julie heard her right away. A short brunette stepped out from the crowd and walked a few steps toward us. "Throw me my stuff, I'm going on a plane ride!" my companion yelled. A leather clutch purse flew through the air, landing a few steps away from my future co-pilot. The brunette had a strong throw. I was impressed. After picking up the purse, my companion walked back toward me with it snugly under her arm. She took her phone out and focused intently on the screen. I watched her as she tapped on a couple of icons and then held the phone to her ear. "Steffi?" she asked the person on the other end. "Mercy. Hey, I'm going on a plane ride with Cowboy." "Yeah, a plane ride. And we're going to see his ranch and everything, okay?" Mercy, huh? We hadn't shared names yet. I was curious. I knew Julie was the girl with the strong arm, but that was all. "Yeah, I'll be fine." Her eyes glanced up to mine. "It'll be fun." "Yeah, Cowboy is really nice." "No, you don't know him, he's—" I could tell someone was worried about who she was going with. I stepped closer and smiled. Being nearer to her was nice. She had a pleasant scent. I took out my wallet, pulled out my private pilot's certificate, and held it up for her to see. Yes, I know. Hold on. I know that, yes. Stephanie, please stop talking, she said, sounding annoyed. Listen, write this down, please. I know you worry about me, but just listen, okay? Do you have something to write with? There was a brief pause. Mercy rolled her eyes at me and swayed her head as she waited. She took off her sunglasses to see the card I was holding up for her. Her bright blue eyes stood out, along with her cute nose, high cheekbones, and warm smile. I could see her better now that the shades were off. Okay. His name is Matthew James Singletary. Uh-huh. Matthew. And his private pilot certificate? Number, I whispered, interrupting her. Her private pilot certificate number is 5555555. She quickly bounced back from my interruption, and I admired her quick thinking. She listened again. Yes, that's it. If I need help and the authorities are looking for Cowboy, that's how they'll know who to find. He'll be wearing a big cowboy hat. Her friend took over for a moment. No, I don't know yet, my new friend said softly. I'll call you later, okay? She closed her eyes, listening for a long moment. Okay, I'll be careful. Love you too, bye. She pressed the button to end the call and put her phone away. I guided her through the gate and glanced back, hoping to spot Faye. But she was already gone. I didn't search too hard. I was caught up in the excitement of our upcoming adventure. Mercy, do you always talk to your friends like that? I asked with a casual smile as I opened the gate. That wasn't my friend, she replied. That was my roommate, Stephanie, she explained. But sometimes she acts just like my mom. Well, that just shows she cares, I said, closing the gate after she walked through. She calls me Mercy Mercy. She heard my real mom call me that one time. It's kind of a short form of Mercedes, she told me. I thought about the name change as we walked to the passenger door of the old refurbished Cessna 172. Mercedes, I said slowly, enjoying each sound as she climbed into the passenger seat. Do you mind if I call you Mercedes instead of Mercy? It's a pretty name, unique kind of special, and it suits you, I said, closing the cockpit door carefully for her. I carefully avoided checking if she was okay with me using her full name, but she didn't seem upset, so I figured it was fine. I took away the blocks from the left wheel, tossed them into the storage area, and closed the door before climbing into my seat. I handed her the headset for the passenger side, set it to intercom only, started the engine, and let it run for a few minutes while I adjusted my headset and tested the intercom by chatting with her. I moved away from the fence on the big tires of the tricycle undercarriage, turned the old plane into the wind, and sped across the open land. We took off quickly. The Cessna's quick response was one of the reasons I loved it, and I turned in a wide circle to the right. Soon, we were back over Jesse's restaurant, where Mercedes and Faye were with a crowd of friends. The young woman was waving excitedly from her seat. I tightened the turn and flew in a circle above, so they could see Mercedes and wave back. From up high, I couldn't spot Faye in the group, though she was likely there. In fact, the last time I saw my ex-wife was when I walked away from her at the picnic table. I moved out of the turn and straightened out, heading south for a minute. Then I turned back and flew over Jesse's again. I rocked the wings a few times as a goodbye and then began to climb gradually. I aimed for the ranch my parents had left me. We would arrive in about 20 minutes. I leveled off at a safe height to avoid any potential bird issues, but not so high that we would be on any radar. As we flew, we chatted. So, I began, if you don't mind me saying, Miss Mercedes, you are the first person I've met with blue eyes who is proud of your background, no offense intended. She gave me a quick look. Well, first off, I'm not Hispanic, smart boy, she said with a hint of annoyance, her brow furrowed. I'm sorry, I replied, glancing her way. I didn't mean to upset you. She looked at me for a moment, clearly annoyed, but then her expression softened into a smile. You are talking to a real Cheyenne girl. The Cheyenne people are Native American, not Hispanic or anything like that. I studied her face for a bit and smiled back. All right, Miss Cheyenne Princess, for a school project I read some old journals from the early 1800s, and I don't remember any of them mentioning blue-eyed Cheyenne girls. I paused to check the instruments, then looked back at the horizon. So, come on, I prompted. There must be some Irish blood in your Cheyenne roots somewhere. Mercedes stuck out her tongue, but she smiled at me. Okay, she finally admitted, grinning widely. I might have an Irish mother happy now? Ah, I see, I responded, trying to sound wise. So your dad must have caught an Irish girl wandering around in the wilderness? Maybe the wilderness of Cheyenne, Wyoming? Nope. It was Philadelphia, she shot back playfully. Mom likes to say she captured a wandering Cheyenne warrior, and now he's all hers. I laughed, imagining the fun arguments between her parents. My own parents had similar playful back-and-forth exchanges all the time. I would really enjoy treating your parents to coffee and having a nice long talk with them. They seem like nice people, I said to her, giving her left hand a gentle tap before going back to the controls. Mercedes asked about Faye. She had heard that Faye said I was her ex. I shared a little about the reasons for my and Faye's split and some of the things we discussed at Jesse's place. I explained that I was okay with my memories and didn't think it was a big deal to invite her on a flight in front of Faye. To me, my ex-wife was just another friend at the table. Mercedes told me that Julie was a second cousin on her mother's side. Julie had invited her and Stephanie to come to Texas for a short break before Mercedes and Stephanie's dance group started preparing for their tour in Europe. She mentioned that Julie worked with Faye, but they didn't know each other very well. I admitted to Mercedes that I didn't know Faye that well either, and we moved on from that topic. Mercedes asked how I learned to fly, so I told her about my Uncle Jake, who taught me the basics and helped me fly solo when I was 15. I shared that flying became one of my favorite hobbies. From there, we talked about whatever came to mind. My navigation was spot on. In fact, we spotted the ranch sooner than I thought. I was enjoying my chat with this lovely young woman. I lined up with the familiar stretch of land I used as a runway and explained to Mercedes how we approach for landing. As we flew in and turned, I smoothly landed the old Cessna on its landing gear. I taxied towards the big barn where we kept the tie-downs and wheel chocks. We secured the plane against the strong winds. It was Texas, after all, and there was always plenty of wind blowing across the plains. Mercedes helped out as best as she could, and when we finished, I led her through the open space in the side of the barn to the other side, where we could see the house a short distance away. Okay, she said, looking around. She pointed to the house where my car was parked near the back porch. Where's the Mustang you mentioned? Oh, over here, I replied, changing direction and heading toward a small group of horses gathered by the corral railing. They were already watching us, eager for a snack. I didn't have any treats with me, but they didn't know that. There she is, I said, pointing to the 3-year-old sorrel filly who seemed to know we were talking about her. Hey, Ginger, I called, holding out my left hand. She came over quickly and nuzzled my palm, looking for something sweet. Mercedes, meet Ginger. Ginger, this is Miss Mercedes, our adventurous friend, I said, introducing them. Ginger tossed her head playfully, while Mercedes tried to hold back her laughter. What's so funny? I asked, puzzled. I checked to see if I had said something wrong, but everything seemed fine. I thought you said you had a Mustang, she explained, still giggling. I do, I said. That's her. She was running free with a small herd in Nevada before she came here a couple of years ago. She's a real Mustang, not many of them around anymore. Mercedes laughed again. I thought you meant a Mustang, like a car, she clarified. You know, vroom, vroom, vroom! That kind of Mustang, I chuckled. Not quite, I told her. What made you think I meant a car? I thought that's just how a cowboy talked, she said, grinning. I couldn't help but smile back. I really liked her sense of humor and how she could joke about herself without getting upset. That was something I didn't see often. No, I said slowly, but I'd still love to see you. Riding fast with your beautiful hair blowing in the wind, I told her. Then I thought of something. You do ride, right, Cheyenne? I asked. She had mentioned Philadelphia before, and I guessed that many women there might not have learned to ride horses. I do, she said with a smile. I used to ride with Grandpa running elk during summer vacations, she explained. But I can't ride in these, she added sadly, pointing to her shorts. They would be too uncomfortable. I wouldn't be able to walk for days. That was true. She would be quite uncomfortable, and I agreed that she shouldn't ride in those shorts. I didn't want her to feel bothered while riding. Then a question popped into my mind. What is your Cheyenne name? I asked. If you don't mind me asking? She looked at me quickly, sizing up my interest, and smiled when she saw that I was sincere. It's something like little dove that calls at morning, she said, looking to see my reaction. I tilted my head, really thinking about the name. After a moment, I nodded slowly and smiled. That's very nice. A lovely name for a lovely woman, I said, meaning it completely. She liked that. She patted my chest a couple of times, and I hadn't even noticed she had moved closer to me. It felt nice to be near her. We made a quick stop at my parents' old house, put some water bottles in the back seat of my Land Rover, and then went out to explore. We drove across the countryside to where I thought a small group of longhorns was hanging around a spring that stayed full all year. The vast prairie beyond my ranch was much bigger than our few hundred acres. I hadn't been able to find anyone who said they owned that land, and it seemed like it had gone back to the government. Still, no one ever told us we couldn't let our cattle graze there, so I decided to use it. The longhorns could be anywhere within a day's walk of the spring. We found the spring easily, and while Mercedes explored, I took some time to tidy up the area. After that, we drove a few miles north and then west around a hill where we spotted the cattle moving along a dry path back to the water we had just left. We parked and watched them stroll along at their own pace. Mercedes noticed the wide span of their horns. To keep her engaged, I started telling her about the history of the longhorn cattle and shared some stories about the area, including the old ruins hidden under the edge of the hill we had just come around. She expressed a wish to see the ruins one day. I promised to take her. I also talked about the buffalo, but they were further away, likely in a different place, since both the longhorns and buffalo seemed to avoid each other, and the afternoon was starting to fade. On our way back home, we chatted about different things. Nothing too important, just friendly conversation. The shadows were growing longer by the time we returned to the house. I drove around to the back and pointed out the swimming pool and hot tub. Then I drove a short way down the hill to show Mercedes the small house where my parents let me stay from when I was 15 until I went off to college. I also showed her the field that had been plowed, now overgrown, where I used to walk back and forth every day when I was younger. I told her I had started running across the field because I wanted to use it to get in shape. I was sure I had done enough exercise just getting to and from the house each day. Back at the front porch of the main house, I turned off the engine but stayed in the car for a moment. Mercedes, I really don't want to take you back to town. I've been having such a great time with you here, but I don't want you to feel like you have to stay. If you'd rather, we can head back to town and I can have you home in time for dinner. She looked at me for a moment, her eyes searching mine. What do you want to do? She asked. I want to grill some steaks and make you a salad for dinner, I answered quickly. Then we can take a swim in the pool out back, and afterward, we can look at the stars while we listen to the coyotes. Mercedes studied me, then smiled slowly. She took out her phone from her back pocket. Stevie? She said, Hi. I'm not coming back tonight, okay? Yeah, I'm staying here at the ranch. I'm not sure if I'll be back tomorrow or the next day. Yeah, everything is fine. I'll call you tomorrow. Bye. She then turned back to me. Cowboy. Matt. She said sincerely, I really need to find that nice bathroom you showed me earlier. I began to appreciate her smile. Of course, I replied, opening the door. Last one inside. Has to wait. I called out playfully. She laughed and tried to open her door quickly. We both rushed up the 4 wide steps to the porch, and I pushed the door open as fast as I could. She was laughing and trying to slow me down playfully, but I was bigger and full of energy. I reached the bathroom first, but instead of stopping, I just touched the door and ran upstairs to the bigger bathroom. I grew up thinking, ladies before gentlemen, and I really followed that rule, or else Mom would have teased me about it. I heard the bathroom door close, then there was quiet. I was busy getting my jeans unbuttoned, feeling an urgent need I hadn't noticed before. I can cook on a stove, but I prefer grilling outside. Mercedes loved fresh vegetables, so we divided the tasks. While I started the grill and cooked the steaks, Mercedes searched the fridge for vegetables and made a beautiful salad, using her own dressing. She brought the salad outside and set the table while I focused on the steaks. We bumped into each other sometimes and playfully moved our hands away when we were about to touch. A few times our hands brushed as we chatted about different things. It had been a while since I had anyone to enjoy moments like this with. I found it very nice, and I thought she did too. Mercedes placed our plates side by side instead of across from each other, which I really liked. We talked softly as the evening grew darker, not about anything serious, just two people getting to know one another. Even though we had only known each other for a few hours, we felt quite relaxed, sharing thoughts and opinions easily, sometimes reaching out to connect lightly. After we finished eating and loaded the dishwasher, we sat back in two loungers on the deck. I had moved them closer together until they were only a few inches apart, and she seemed comfortable with that. We gazed at the stars for a long time, trying to name the constellations we didn't really know, and wondering if that bright spot moving quickly across the sky was a satellite or something mysterious. But we didn't really care. After a while, I placed my hand gently over hers. She didn't pull away. As the night got cooler, we left the deck and went back inside. At the door, Mercedes stopped suddenly, and I almost bumped into her. She turned around and I found myself holding her close. We shared a warm hug that stretched out as we enjoyed the moment together. She pulled back a little but kept her arms around my neck, looking at me softly. "I usually don't get this comfortable so quickly," she said with a small smile. "That's okay," I replied softly, realizing I hadn't thought of this as a typical first date. She looked up at me, relaxed and happy, and leaned in for another kiss. We stayed close, enjoying the quiet between us. She broke the silence. "Do you remember when you showed me around earlier?" "Yeah," I said, happy to be with her. "Could you lead us back to that cozy room upstairs?" I smiled and took her hand, guiding her. As we walked through the living room, turning off lights, I felt a warm sense of happiness. We climbed the stairs together, letting the simple moment carry us along. We settled in, enjoying each other's presence and sharing laughter and nice conversation. As the night went on, Mercedes and I sat close, connecting over quiet talks. The cool air outside reminded us it was time to go in, so we stood up and walked inside. At the door, she paused, looking back at me with a bright smile. We shared a warm and caring hug, staying close for a moment. We settled on the couch, talking and laughing together, enjoying each other's company. It felt easy and natural, filled with the warmth of our connection. Mercedes rested her head on my shoulder, and we both enjoyed the quiet as we cherished the moment. As the evening turned to early morning, we finally went upstairs. In the soft glow of the room, we lay side by side, chatting softly about everything and nothing, our laughter mixing with the calm of the night. The closeness felt simple and sincere. We relaxed together and enjoyed the peaceful quiet. The bond between us felt special and unhurried as we drifted off to a gentle sleep, content just to be near one another. When I woke up the next morning, Mercedes' lovely dark hair was spread across my chest, her head resting on my shoulder, and her legs were tangled with mine. Earlier, just before dawn, she had woken me up, and we shared a sweet moment together, feeling a strong connection. She had only slightly shifted away. Her soft skin felt nice against mine. I had been on a few dates since my divorce, but Mercedes was the first one I felt such a real closeness with. As she started to stir, I kissed her forehead gently. She sighed happily. She lifted her head and gave me a smile. "Ouch," she said playfully. "What's wrong?" I asked. "I'm lying on my hair," she giggled. We carefully untangled ourselves and found the strands of her hair that had gotten under us during the night. She sat up and gathered her hair behind her. "Easy there," she said, noticing my smile as I watched her. "I really need a shower, cowboy," she said. "Well, funny enough, so do I replied. She jumped off the bed and danced over to me. She held out her hand and we quickly went into the large bathroom that used to belong to my parents. In the steamy shower, she wouldn't let my hands wander too much. She said if we started fooling around, we'd lose track of time, and she wanted to have breakfast. After the shower, I helped her wash her long, lovely hair. I made sure to be gentle while brushing it afterward. She seemed happy by the time I was done. We had a nice breakfast of bacon and scrambled eggs with toast and jam. I learned that she was very proud of being a meat lover. I noticed this when she finished her steak quickly last night and polished off all the bacon at the table. She later admitted there was no official group for meat lovers. I suggested we should create one. She sat on my lap and smiled. Breakfast felt like a great way to start our day. Wearing one of my t-shirts, Mercedes found her phone and called her friend Stephanie to check in, making sure I hadn't done anything wrong overnight. They talked for a bit. I didn't pay much attention to their conversation. After putting on a pair of jeans and my boots, I took out the trash behind the barn to the fire pit for burning and cleaned up part of the barn where we kept the horses. When I came back inside, I grabbed a can of soda. Mercedes had ended her call, and her phone was on the charging station. That's when I figured it out. "Got it!" I shouted. I had just solved what was bothering me about blue jeans, Mercedes, and horses. Mercedes looked at me unsure. "Mom's belongings, she left everything behind," I said, making a chopping motion with my hand. "Let me explain. Mom and Dad didn't want this ranch anymore, so they gave it to me so I could sell it. They are in an RV traveling around the country, and they said I could take anything from the house that I wanted. But if there was anything I didn't want, I had to deal with it myself, okay?" Mercedes nodded quickly. "And some of my mom's things are here, like a few pairs of blue jeans." I looked at her closely. "I think a pair of her jeans would fit you well enough. You could wear them when riding, if you still want to." She nodded happily. We hurried upstairs. I showed Mercedes where my mom's old closet was, and she started looking through it for something to wear. I opened my laptop and started a video chat, planning to ask my mom if we could borrow the jeans and give her an update on my life. "Hi, sweetie," Mom said when the connection opened. "I've been thinking about you. How are things going?" "Just fine, Mom. I sold Chip and Tatler last week." They were two of our horses. "I think I might have a buyer for the buffalo, but I won't know for a few days. Other than that, most of the farm machinery is sold and things are going pretty well. How about you?" I heard some quiet giggling and soft noises coming from the direction of my mom's closet. I turned to see Mercedes holding something she found. She caught my eye, and I saw she was holding a strange item. My expression changed as I realized what it was. In her right hand, Mercedes was holding a pair of handcuffs, and in her left, a set of ankle cuffs. I took the handcuffs from her. Mom?" I asked. "What are these?" I held up the cuffs. I noticed the key to unlock them was taped to a piece of metal chain. I waited, letting the cuffs hang in front of the laptop camera. "Tom, I thought you cleaned out the closet," Mom said angrily, looking off screen. "Nope," Dad responded simply. "You said you were going to get your box of things and put it in the RV, remember?" Mom turned back and pursed her lips. "Well, honey," she finally said with a little smile, "sometimes grown-ups have a bit of fun." I cut in, "Mom, I understand how things work. Just tell me what this is about." She took a deep breath, thinking a moment. Then she shrugged her shoulders. "Matt, honey, your dad and I are older, but we're still here to enjoy life." She showed a playful grin. "We like to have our fun, okay?" Mercedes handed me a piece of gear. I blinked and held it up in front of the laptop camera. "And what is this, Mom?" I asked. Mom took another breath. "Well, this is part of the fun," she started. She glanced off to the side, probably where Dad was nearby. "Tom, you should have reminded me about the box," she said, not waiting for a response. "So, maybe your dad gets lucky on his birthday if one of my friends comes over for a special night and we—" That was a lot to take in, but I was enjoying teasing my mom. I was learning things I didn't know about my parents. I realized they were a lively couple who cared for each other. A memory flashed in my mind. "Oh, wait, you mean like when Aunt Janet came over and stayed the night?" I asked. Aunt Janet was just a close friend of my mom's, but maybe she was more special than I realized. Mom replied. She didn't say yes, but her uncertainty didn't sound like a no either. Wow, I couldn't believe it. "So, when you sent me down to my cabin on Dad's birthday, everyone was, 'Don't be disrespectful, Matthew,'" Mom warned me with a serious tone. "I won't, Mom," I promised. "But why the—" "Because I have a rule, son. When your dad is having his fun, I want to enjoy myself too." I didn't respond. I was completely surprised. "Hi, sweetie," my mom called out. I wasn't sure what Mom was doing now. She had already said hello. "Is my son treating you well?" she asked. "Shouldn't you introduce us, Matthew?" she said clearly to me. I was confused. Mercedes wasn't in view of the camera and was being quiet, so Mom shouldn't have known anyone was there with me. "Son, you do remember my mirror is over there behind you, right?" I looked behind me. There was the old full-length mirror Mom kept in the bedroom. I could see Mercedes looking at something else, clearly reflected in the glass. I casually pulled my t-shirt down. I sighed. Things were getting a bit complicated. "Mom, say hello to Mercedes. Mercedes, this is my mom," I said, making the introductions. Mercedes waved at the mirror, then turned to me and smiled for the camera. "Hi, Mrs. Singletary," she said cheerfully. Mom laughed. "After the talk you've been listening to, you can just call me Leah, like in Star Wars," Mom said happily, grinning. "Okay, Leah." Mercedes replied quickly, "I think it's nice how you and your son can talk so openly like this. It's great." They chatted for a while, and I kind of tuned them out. I was fairly sure Mom couldn't see my left hand resting beside Mercedes, but I wasn't sure if that needed to be hidden anymore. Strange morning. Dad's face popped up on the screen. He waved at Mercedes before disappearing again. Mom leaned back for a moment, then leaned forward again. I was confused for a second. "Mom, is Dad?" My mom gave me a playful smile. "Sweetie, you don't think you're the only one Uncle Jake helped, do you?" she asked cheerfully. I was shocked. Did my mom know that Uncle Jake taught me about certain things? What about those other lessons from his friends? "Sweetheart, I have to go now, okay?" Mom said, looking a bit uneasy. Her eyes darted to Mercedes. "Just make sure the two of you don't do anything I wouldn't want to hear about, all right?" She pressed a button on her laptop. "Mom!" I called out before she could leave. "What wouldn't you do?" She thought about it for a moment. "Honey, I'll need to think about that, okay?" she said with a smile. "Nice to meet you, Mercedes," she added. Then she pressed a key, and her image was gone. I closed my laptop and turned to Mercedes. I felt surprised, but I wasn't upset. "Cowboy," Mercedes said softly, "how much do you want to go riding?" She walked toward the bed, holding some gear. I didn't take my time answering. I moved quickly toward her. We didn't get to ride that day or the next, but on the fourth day, we finally went riding. We really needed it. That's how things went over the weekend and into the following week. Everything changed on Thursday. "Honey, Matt," Mercedes said gently at breakfast. She had been quiet since we woke up, and I could tell something was on her mind. "Uh-huh," I said calmly, prepared to find out what was troubling her. "You know Stephanie, right?" "I know who you mean. I don't really know her personally, though." Mercedes nodded. "Could we invite her to come stay with us? Would that be okay?" I was surprised. Things were going well between Mercedes and me. We got along nicely in everything we did. We shared morning chores on the farm, cooked meals together, took walks down the road, and enjoyed horseback riding. We had a good time together, but then I started to wonder why she wanted to invite someone else out here. It seemed like it would make it harder for us to connect on a deeper level. Her invitation was interesting because she mentioned bringing Stephanie to stay with us. "Sure," I replied calmly. I didn't see the point in creating problems. If Mercedes didn't want to spend time alone with me, then I should just go along with whatever was happening. Mercedes brightened up at my answer. "Thanks, honey. I'll call her, okay?" "Of course." She took my hand while she talked to her friend, which felt like a good sign to me. "Hi, Steffi," she said. "Cowboy says yes, so we're all set. Yes, we can do some routines. The living room has a nice floor, and yes, Stephanie. Horses, yes, the airplane too. Stephanie, stop talking." She rolled her eyes and smiled at me. "Okay, yeah, we'll do lots of things. Just pack Stephanie. Steffi. Quiet, listen to me. Just pack a few things. No, you don't need much. We're pretty laid back, okay? Yeah, I know. Listen, pack my bag with my brushes and hairdryer and... Yes, you know what I need, right?" When she said "we" again, it made me feel good about everything. Then, a thought crossed my mind and I waved to get her attention. "Hang on a minute, Steph," Mercedes said to her friend. "Does she know how to get here?" I asked. It seemed like Mercedes had only talked about things for Stephanie to bring to the ranch. Mercedes took a deep breath, showing a hint of frustration. She shook her head. I smiled. "If she can get to McReady's airfield, we can pick her up in the Cessna. What do you think?" I gave her the address and started with some driving directions. "She has a GPS," Mercedes said, interrupting me. She shared the address with Stephanie and looked back at me. "When?" she asked. "How soon can she get there?" Mercedes asked and got a reply. "A couple of hours?" I nodded and glanced at the clock on the wall. "Okay. Tell her we'll be there at 1:00. I then remembered something Mercedes told Stephanie. I motioned for her to cover the microphone. "Was she upset about the laid-back thing you mentioned?" I asked. Mercedes smiled wide. "Nope. Steph is, well, maybe a little adventurous. I smiled back. I had a fun idea. Okay, tell her. How about putting her on speaker and I'll tell her? Mercedes did that, tapping an icon on the screen and setting the phone on the table. I sat next to her. Stephanie? I asked. Hey, this is, Cowboy? Hi, Cowboy, she replied cheerfully. She wasn't shy or hesitant. She'd talked to me when I filled in for Mercedes during their long chats while Mercedes stepped away. Say, Steph, we'll fly down there to meet you at McReady's, like Mercedes said, but I think you should know that today is National Flying Day. Did you know that? No, what does that mean? Stephanie asked, confused. I smiled at Mercedes. Well, Stephanie, what it means is that everyone in a small plane must follow a special guideline if they take off between 7 a.m. and 11 p.m., and that includes us. I'm really sorry, but I don't know any way around it, I explained. Mercedes had both hands over her mouth, trying not to laugh. Her eyes sparkled with fun. Well, Stephanie said uncertainly, I guess it's okay. Do I need to drive to the airport thinking about that? Oh, no, not at all, I told her. I didn't want any trouble during the drive. But when you get to the parking lot at McReady's, you need to be ready when you get out of the car to walk to the plane, okay? This is very important. I was just having some fun, tricking her a bit. Make sure you don't leave the car until you see Mercedes and me pull up close to the parking lot, all right? Okay, Stephanie responded happily. I got up and went to the kitchen to make some quick sandwiches. We had made a nice roast with all the sides last night, and I was excited about making roast beef sandwiches. Mercedes helped me check the Cessna. It was the first time I'd done this, and I was really enjoying it. We packed a change of clothes in the storage compartment, and we flew comfortably. Are you sure this will be okay? Mercedes asked again. Trust me, I said kindly. I can't count how many times I've been stopped by anyone while flying from one place to another. Oh, actually, I can. Never. I smiled. This was going to be great. McReady's was a small airport outside the city. It didn't have a control tower and wasn't busy like the main airport. It was mostly used by weekend pilots who just wanted to get up in the air and enjoy a flight. I knew the field, the owner, and the staff very well. I liked them, and they liked me back. I took the plane on a low pass over the airfield, looking down at the parking lot. It was almost 1 o'clock, and then I saw it. A small car was pulling in. I kept the Cessna tilted to the right, letting Mercedes take a look outside. Is that Stephanie in that green car? I asked. It's not just green, yeah, that's her, Mercedes replied. I leveled out the plane, flew downwind, and then landed smoothly. As we rolled toward the parking area, a girl stepped out of the car, dressed simply for the day. She walked to the edge of the grassy runway, carrying 2 small bags. She came over and followed my hand signals to get to Mercedes's side. In moments, Mercedes was outside the plane, handing the small bags to me. I quickly placed them in the passenger seat behind me. Stephanie climbed in and took the remaining seat in the back while Mercedes hurried to buckle in up front with me, her face lit up with excitement. We were all smiling, ready for the adventure ahead. I revved the engine, pulled back out, and got the plane in the air a couple of minutes later. November 31902, Papa Romeo, came a voice on the radio. It was Jean, the airfield owner. There wasn't an air traffic control tower, so this was likely just a friendly call. I gestured for Mercedes and Stephanie to put on the earphones I had set out for them. 31902 Papa Romeo, I replied with a smile. Ah, 902 Papa Romeo, request you return to McReady Field for, passenger check and processing copy. Jean struggled to hold back laughter. I could hear others chuckling in the background. I couldn't help but grin wider. Negative, McReady, I answered. 2 Papa Romeo is headed to the home port for an important event, 10-4. You have quite a few people who would really like you to stay a while and chat, Matt, he said, giving up on being formal. I understand, Jean, I replied. I really needed to get to my destination soon, you know. You rascal, he replied. Woof, woof, I laughed, enjoying the moment. 31902 Papa Romeo signing off. I began my way home and showed the girls how to switch their headsets to talk to each other. Okay, what's happening? Stephanie asked. Mercedes giggled. You've been tricked, girl, she said to Stephanie. There's no nude flying day, she explained. Very happy to see you, Miss Stephanie, I joked, offering my hand for a handshake. Ang, Stephanie playfully swatted my hand away. Just like that man said, you rascal! She didn't seem upset at all. Mercedes had said Stephanie was a bit daring, which seemed true. She definitely had a strong presence and a lively spirit. One thing I didn't get was that Mercedes mentioned Stephanie might identify as a lesbian, but then said it was unclear. Stephanie appeared relaxed and easygoing, so I decided not to think too deeply about it. We spent the afternoon exploring the house and the yard. Stephanie met Ginger, my horse, and another horse I thought would be good for her if we went riding together. Much of the afternoon was spent by the pool, where the two girls caught up on their lives. Mercedes included me in the talks and guided the conversation so Stephanie and I could learn more about each other. As the sun started to set, we were all feeling relaxed. Mercedes began to move closer to me, with friendly touches that felt more comfortable than before. We shared playful gestures, adding to the cheerful mood. When we decided to close the outside doors for the night, Mercedes took our hands and led us upstairs to the bedroom. There hadn't been any talk about limits. It felt like both women understood that something exciting was coming. I didn't say anything, and chose to follow along. When we entered the bedroom, Mercedes whispered to me, "Just so you know, she thinks she's into girls, okay?" Mercedes had mentioned this before, and it made me think about what it meant. I figured I'd just handle things as they happened. Mercedes invited us to sit together on the edge of the bed. We made ourselves comfortable, ready for whatever the night might bring. Mercedes rested back, her hand on mine as we shared a quiet moment. We looked at each other with a sense of understanding, feeling close and relaxed. The evening was calm as we talked and laughed, sharing little moments that felt special. We sat side by side, simply enjoying each other's presence and the gentle bond we had created. As we spent time together, our interactions felt light and natural. Mercedes leaned over, resting her head on my shoulder with a happy smile. I took her hand gently, feeling that we didn't need words to express the warmth we shared. The night flowed with easy conversation and laughter, filled with friendship and sincerity. We stayed close, enjoying the peaceful silence, with the warmth of our connection filling the room. When we finally fell asleep, a sense of calm and contentment lingered, with nothing but kindness and respect among us. Mercedes, Stevie, and I spent many enjoyable days together, finding happiness in each other's company, both at home and outside. We worked on morning tasks, went for rides where I finally saw Mercedes riding Ginger at full speed, her long hair flowing behind her. We had fun swimming in the pool and going to the lake to ride jet skis. Every day was filled with laughter and good times. In the evenings, we enjoyed relaxed talks and shared meals. The house was filled with laughter as we exchanged stories. I took the girls out dancing in the city twice, and we enjoyed meals at nice restaurants, cherishing the time we spent together. Our days were filled with easy friendship, and each day brought new adventures. The warmth of our bond and the joy of shared experiences made us excited for what the next day would bring. We drove the Range Rover into town and cleared out their apartment. I spent just over 3 weeks with Mercedes. 1 week alone with her and 2 more with both Mercedes and Stephanie. Those were the best weeks of my life. We had planned to share a special moment on the last night as a farewell, but Mercedes and I decided just to support each other instead. She and Stephanie were leaving in the morning, and it was hard for all of us. "You know why I asked if Stevie could come here, right?" Mercedes asked quietly. I nodded in the dim light of the bedroom, with only the moon shining through the window. "If you and I had another couple of weeks alone together," I said, "maybe tomorrow wouldn't feel so real," I replied with a hint of sadness. And Stephanie needed her own journey to understand things. I paused for a moment. "Did that journey help you?" I asked gently. She sighed. "I'm not sure," she said sadly. "Maybe if we get through tomorrow, then maybe it has just a little. But I never expected Stephanie to have feelings for you as deeply as I did," Mercedes added with a light-hearted tone. "Or you for her?" I had no reply. Everything felt really confusing. We sat in silence for a while. "And you know about Stevie and me dancing?" "I do. You both grew up together, started dancing when you were 4 and she was a little younger?" "I know," I replied. "Maybe I could stay here and find—" "No, that wouldn't work," I cut in gently. "You have a great chance in Philadelphia. I can't take that dream from you. It wouldn't be fair, and eventually you'd wonder what could have happened." That could create problems for us even if we tried our best. I took a deep breath, letting it out slowly. And if I came with you to Philadelphia, you'd be so busy with your dancing that we wouldn't get to spend much time together. I sighed again. We couldn't make that work either. We might have talked more, but then someone knocked on the door. Stevie sniffled, trying to keep her tears in check. "Can I sleep with you both?" she asked. Stevie had intended to give us some space, but the thought of being alone felt too heavy for her. "Of course," I said softly, looking at Mercedes. She nodded in agreement. "Come and let me hold you, okay?" I said to Stevie. She slid under the covers and cuddled against me. I lay back and the girls rested their heads on my shoulders. We weren't sharing any special moment, but we felt closer than ever. After Mercedes and Stevie went home, I felt lost, completely. They didn't call or text, and I didn't reach out either. We had decided that staying in touch would only make things harder and wouldn't help anything. It was just how things were. It hurt a lot. I focused on taking care of the ranch, selling or giving away the rest of the property. I sold all the cattle to a ranch near Kingsville, where they would join their current herd. I sold Ginger and another 3-year-old horse to the Ingram family for just $1 each. Fred and Sarah Ingram had 2 daughters, 13-year-old Amber and 11-year-old Pamela, who instantly loved the horses. They had stopped to watch me train the horses by the gate one day. By the time Fred managed to pull the girls away, my shirt was soaked from their hugs and happy chatter. It made me feel good to see them so excited. The rest of the horses sold quickly as well, and I found a rancher in Colorado to buy the buffalo. He was already raising bison there. All the leftover farm vehicles were sent to an auction in the next county, where they sold without delay, and that was that. I gave Uncle Jake's old Cessna 172 to Gene McReady for his pilot training program. When I delivered it, he and a coworker flew me back home. They chatted happily the whole way, mostly remembering the day I took off from their airfield. I didn't invite them inside when we reached the ranch because I was getting tired of all the memories. I drained the pool and filled it with rocks and dirt. I didn't want any animals to fall in and be trapped. Then I searched the house for anything that might be useful, going through it several times to ensure Mom hadn't left more boxes behind. I got all the right permits for a controlled burn and set fire to the old ranch house and the small house where I lived as a teenager. The oil company didn't want the buildings, and I didn't want to leave anything behind. The local volunteer fire department came by as a precaution while the houses burned. We turned it into a little gathering, serving baby back ribs, brisket, and all the sides from Jesse's for the firefighters, along with plenty of soda and bottled water. Everyone stayed around long after the fire was out, eating and chatting until their partners started calling, wondering where they were. That night I stayed at a motel, feeling a bit distant from everything that had kept me there. The next morning, I set off for California. My parents were heading to Yosemite, and I planned to meet them there for a quick visit. It must have looked a bit odd for a 30-year-old man to visit his parents at a campsite in the woods. To be continued.
What's up, story lovers? This is the Story Guy, and if you're hungry for crazy tales and mind-blowing narratives, you've come to the right place. Don't forget to smash that subscribe button so you don't miss out on our weekly dose of crazy cheating stories, fun fiction, and gut-ripping comedy from around the world. But that's not all. We also create our own original stories, and trust me, you won't find these anywhere else. Want even more spine-tingling reads? Head down to the description and grab our exclusive story collections. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.